Judging from that error, since it was not rendering at the door, I believe the problem is most likely within this block of code. The problem is, I see it now, we need to set tile equal to tile.tile. We also need the path to be actionable tiles. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, looks good. All right, it looks good. No problems yet. Let's open up the console. I have a feeling that picking up the sword might not work yet. Yeah. See, we can run over it, but there's no interaction. So let's go back to our game and see what's going on. Let's go to our system. And in the actionable system, let's see what's going on. We are attempting to calculate collision. We have a console.log in the action space. However, we don't seem to be getting that in here. So there must be something going wrong with detecting the collision. This looks right to me. Seems like we're getting the entity. We're calling or destructuring the properties from both the player and the entity. We're using the normal comparison. It looks like by all metrics, this should be at least hitting this console.log. Now we have the actionable component requirements. Let me go into my registry, actionable system, actionable component. Okay, we also need to add this break. So good thing we found that. Let me go back to index.js. You know what? Actually, we most likely have not added the dummy. Yep, we did not add the dummy component. Okay, so this is the next step we need to do. And luckily, past Jake was very nice to us, and he already wrote out how this dummy component should look. So let's take this. We can just copy it, and I'll just pull it out of this comment. Actionable. Let's just make sure we have all of our commas that we need. Double check that it matches how we want the actionable component to look. Args, yes. And we need the func now. So we can uncomment that func. And what is the function that we're going to fire? Well, we're going to fire the sword pickup animation. So let's take this. We'll import it into this file. Just like that. And let's push this dummy actionable component into the components array. Just like that. Okay, so now that should work, or at least it should get us to call this function. Because if you see in here, we're going to be calling it right here. Although we don't need to do that. Let's actually comment that out. And now we will use this event bus. Let's get the actionable component. So const actionable equal to player component, or actually it's entity components actionable, and we'll pull out the args and func from actionable, and we can easily just drop these properties in, and we can push this event. And now if we go to the event bus, if we look, it should be called. So let's see what we get. Looking at this function, it looks okay, although I need to get rid of the this. If you guys have this values, please delete them like I just did. So we'll go to the screen now. Oh, but one last thing, actually. I have a bad habit of doing this. We don't need that. Now I think we're good to test it. Okay. In the action space, that's good. Event bus is not defined. That's because we did not pass it to the system. Go to here, go to the actionable system, pass this event bus. Go to system.js, pass event bus. Let's go back to our screen. Cool. Okay, we're getting something different now. Let's see. Okay, fail to execute draw image. This is good though. We have our sword entity here. So aside from the errors, which we will fix, it just looks like we have the wrong path for the image. So that's okay. We know how to fix that. We can go back into our text editor. And here we have our path. And it's supposed to be, let's see, I think it's assets, link PNG. I think that's how it's supposed to be. Let's try this again. Okay, cool. We're creating the sword entity. Now nothing's happening on the screen, but we know and we can see by our console that the sword is being created and that there are no current errors with our code that we have at the moment. That's good. Let's scroll down really quickly. And since we're just testing out this screen, for ease of use, I want to just load link right into the screen when I refresh. I don't want to have to constantly run into the shop. So why don't we go to where that screen is being loaded up in the index.js. And from in this line, we can just change this to shop. So make sure you import the shop. Luckily, again, my text editor helps me. You go to screen.screen.js, export this, and then pass it right into this load screen function, and then link will just load up in the shop immediately, like that. Now let's fix the problem of link sword not actually showing up. And the thing is, we're going to be using the sword in the animation. So link will pause, he'll hold up the sword, and then he'll return to normal. This entity is going to be that sword that's in the air. And right off the bat, I can tell that the reason why we're not getting the sword is probably because there's not a valid X and Y value. We need to get the X and Y value that are in the position component. Player.components. So let's change this. Now let's go back. Ah, yes. Doesn't look good, but there it is. We can see that something is happening on the screen. That's good enough for us at the moment. And it just looks like to me that it's a little small. That's fine. We can keep it like that at the moment. I just wanted to make sure that was working. Because now what we want to do is remove the old tile and put down the new tile. So that way, once Link interacts with that sword tile, it'll disappear and its replacement tile, a black square, will then be rendered in its place. And well, how do we do this? We can think through it logically. If you go and play the NES game, you know that Link will pause. Again, as I've said many times, a sound will play, and we'll get to sounds later, but a sound will play. The game will essentially freeze while Link holds that position, and then things will resume. So what I want to do is I want to essentially stop the game, or I at least want to stop the player from putting in inputs that will move Link and kind of change the animation. We want the player to not be able to put in any inputs while this is going on. So we want it to last, the animation, we want it to last a few seconds. What we can do is we can create an end time for the animation. And we can set the end time to be 3,000 milliseconds. So 3,000 milliseconds is just 3 seconds. That might be a little long, but let's just start with that and we can adjust it as we go. When Link does this animation, if you look, he has this, I'm having trouble scrolling. He has this animation where he's holding this sword up with his hand. So what we want to do is we want to get that PNG. We essentially want to make that an entity and get that sprite. What we want to do is we want to get this square, this sprite right here, and change it to our entity's current src rect property. So let's get the X and Y for this sprite. Let's think about now how to get this animation over here. What we will do is we're going to create kind of like a dummy animation component, but not really. We need to specify two things. We need to specify the source rectangle from where we can grab this link from, as well as the number of frames that will be in the animation. So we're going to make an object, and we'll come right here, and we'll say, let's say it's link animation. And it's going to have two properties. It's going to have src rect, which we're used to seeing, and another property called num frames. And this is going to take the value of 1 because we're only going to show Link doing this single pose. And it is going to kind of mimic how we have our animation component set up currently, where we have src rect as well as current frame num frames. We need num frames and src rect. We can also take current frames and frame speed rate as well. I think actually that would be a good idea. Current frame would be 0, and then frame speed rate. It doesn't really matter. However, I know our system is expecting us to have some kind of frame speed rate defined. So let's give it the value of 3. And then for the src rect, now we need to grab this specific sprite. So I think 0 would be good, right? Because it's on the first column. While Y is a little bit more difficult to pinpoint. I know that the sword is about 175. That is where we are pulling the sword out from, which is right underneath Link here. It's not exactly underneath. So let's just play around with these values. I think 145 would probably be a good thing to mess around with. And then for Link, we set the height and width to 20. And also, this src rect needs to be in an array. And the reason it needs to be an array is because if you remember, our src rect for our animations takes an array. So there we go. Does that look good? No, we're missing. It needs to be inverse. It needs to be an array of objects. So let me fix that. Okay, very good. I'll fix the spacing so it's a little bit more clear. Okay. Now what's going to happen is we are going to take this sprite and we're going to put it onto the Link animation src property that we have in here. So if you go to components, we can see that our system, and I'll put this side by side, in our animation system, we actually go deep into this animation component. We go into animation frames where it's facing, if it's moving or attacking, and then the src rect, and we pull out the current frame based on this variable, and then we set that to sprite src rect. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to simply replace this src rect array inside the animation component, and we're going to keep it there until the animation is done, where we will then put back the original src rect. So what I'm going to do, I made this src rect, which will be the animation. We want to also grab the original src rect, and we can do that by going into player, or rather, no, actually what I do want to do is we can go directly into link animation, and we can just dive into this object itself. And that's really easy because it's within the same file as this animation is. So let's go into link animation. Let's go into value, frames, and we need the facing value, which will be up. But I'm going to change that. We're going to pull out the facing value and put that in dynamically. Then it's going to be move. And we are going to take this src rect right here. We're going to take the whole array. Let me get the facing from the player.components.animation component. Or no, it's not in the animation, sorry. It would be in the... it would be in the animation component. We'll change this to facing. And now theoretically, we should have the original source rectangle that we're removing, and then the link animation rectangle, which we will be applying. So now that we have that, let's try applying it to our player. So let's do player.components animation. And it's quite a deep dive. So let's even go back to our system. And how we're doing it here is we're going to animation, frames, facing, move, and then instead of current frame, it's src rect. And let's set that to link animation src rect. Or what we should do actually is we don't need to go deep into src rect. We can actually just go back and just set it to link animation in general. That should be fine. Yes, I think that's actually better because these are all the values that need to be in here anyway. So we can actually just replace it like that. For the original src rect, it's actually move. So we want to do a copy of not just the src rect property, but the num frames, current frame, etc. So I think that looks good. It's not perfect yet, but let's just see what we got. Let's just visualize what it is that's happening. So let me refresh this. So now hopefully when I run into the sword, there will be a change in the animation. It's not a perfect change, but it's there. And he's also keeping the same animation going down. I think that's because I pressed down going out of the sword, so it actually overrided the up and the down animation. Left and right work, but let me just see if I go left and right. Yeah, now this is his animation all the time. Okay, that's fine. We have the proper animation. He's a little off center. Let's play around with that a bit just to get it looking perfect. Let's move him to 147.5. See how that looks. A little better. Link is still a bit off center. So I told you guys earlier that I actually like to use minus values sometimes just to move things and get them centered in the sprite square. So let me just do -2. You guys play around with that at home, but it should be a -2 as well. Or -3. Let's see how this works. I kind of like that placement. He looks directly in the square, which is good. Great, so now that that's done, let's do the recursion for this end time. And we're going to do the recursion to waste time. So the final two parts are to create the replacement tile and to handle user input. Once we do those two things, we'll have all the pieces together, and then we just need to waste 3,000 milliseconds until the animation is complete, and then return everything to normal. So let me finish setting up this foundation. So please create the replacement tile, and the way to do that, it's very simple. If you guys remember, we're passing in the new tile position component. So luckily, we do not need to create a new position component. All we need to do is create const dummy sprite tile component. And we're going to only be passing it a path value because we don't need to specify an src rect. We're using the whole entire sprite sheet for this file. So that would be assets, and then I believe it is shop tiles 0.png. And to be sure, assets shop tiles 0.png. That looks good. However, we do need to go up one, or do we not? Let's see, actually. No, we do not need to go up one. Let's create this dummy replacement tile. Player registry, create entity, dummy sprite tile, and then new tile position component. Let's handle user input. And to handle user input, it's going to be similar to how we handled it in index.js. We're going to go into index.js just to compare. And just how these are add event listeners, we need to remove these event listeners for this function. Remove the this, and that looks good. Now we'll waste time to have the animation fire, and we'll return things to normal. So waste time, turn to normal. And we're going to do this by utilizing recursion. And I'm going to define a function inside the function, inside the animation function. I'm going to call it. If you're not familiar with recursion, it's when a function has a call to itself from within its own executable code block. You can use this for a variety of purposes. There's a lot of goals you can achieve through the use of recursion. What we need to do is compare the time that this animation started at plus 3,000 milliseconds or 3 seconds. We need to compare this end time to the time that it is currently. If the time that it is currently is greater, that means the animation should have elapsed. So if end time is greater than, or no, less than or equal to date now, end the animation. If not, keep animation running. And to keep the animation running, we could call recursion inside of it again. However, what I want to do now is I want to call request animation frame so it will run asynchronously instead. Also, while the animation is running, we do want to keep links static. We want to limit any kind of velocity he could potentially have. So let's set his velocity to 0. Before, we had not yet prevented him from having velocity. If we remove key up without setting the velocity to 0, he can still have velocity from the key down remove event listener line that we wrote. So let's set this to, that should be movement, Vx, Vy. once the animation is complete, we want to set things back to normal. So we want to undo the things that we did. So let's undo those things. The first thing that comes to my mind is just right here. Let's just re-add these event listeners. Remove this. Cool. So that's the first thing that we should add back. Let's set the player animation frames facing move. We'll set it back to the original SRC. Original SRC. And then this sword entity, I know it doesn't look very good on the screen. We need to fix how that looks. Let's add this to the entities to be killed or removed property, because we only needed it to show for those few seconds that it was on the screen for. Moved, push, sword entity.